I think Muslims can heal the pain of America now because we're that vital center that balances out the extremes on right and left. Just talking about the issues that are important to America from that pulpit.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
On this episode of the Sumud Podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Imam Suhaib Webb. From a hip-hop DJ in Oklahoma to one of America's most influential Muslim scholars, Suhaib Webb bridges faith and culture with wisdom, authenticity, and a deep commitment to education. I am your host, Ed Hasan. Visit sumudpod.com to subscribe and connect with us on social media. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Wear the Peace. For those of you who are watching this episode on YouTube, you're going to see an art blanket behind me with a collection of artwork by the children of Gaza. Wear the Peace collected the artwork and put them on blankets and hoodies. It was just so inspirational. I had to share it. Visit wearthepeace.com to check them out. Welcome, Suhaib Webb, to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
So I was talking to somebody the other day, and you have people convinced that you're Arab. And I'm like, no, he's not Arab. He's from Oklahoma. That's where you grew up. That's where you were raised, right? Can you talk about your experiences growing up in Oklahoma in general?
But yeah, my parents, interestingly enough, my father was the son of a Christian preacher. My father went to Pepperdine, lived in Watts, worked in the Sears and Watts. So he was like this semi-woke white dude in the 50s and 60s. And then they moved to Oklahoma to do his PhD at the University of Oklahoma. I have relatives like in Oklahoma, from Wilson, Oklahoma, from like Bedouins, man, like small towns, and in Texas. So I was born in Oklahoma in 1972. I'm a Gen Xer. And, good parents, lived in the country for a while and then moved to the city and then like really got interested in basketball. I'm like almost 6'5", 6'4", played for Blake Griffin's father. My parents had already sort of hit me to certain things about the United States in ways that are pretty good for white folks sometimes when you think about sometimes how white folks don't see things. So my father was like, Black people are treated like crap here. And I was like, what? I had that conversation with my father. My father actually asked me to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And then I went to this high school that was in the city, and I had classmates that were on food stamps and stuff, man. And I was just like, from all angles getting this. But my parents weren't by any means perfect, but they were a little bit more aware, I would say. So I was raised in that environment. Even the idea of Christianity being something that is rooted in pushing back against things that are wrong. So I remember my mother took me to the ERA march, man. I remember people throwing their bras and stuff, man. And my mom was like covering my eyes. And she's like, we're going to get this pass for women. And so I came through a family that had a little bit of a greater sense of awareness. And that sort of also led me to think about my own spiritual trajectory.
What position did you play in basketball?
So it's crazy. I actually was a shooting guard, which is really weird. Had a good shot. And then I grew 4 inches, man, my freshman year. And they started playing me on the inside. And so I did a little bit of both, and I tore my leg up really badly, and I was like, whatever, not worth it.
Did you have Steph Curry shot or nah?
I definitely didn't have more like the white shadow, maybe. I didn't have the Steph Curry for sure. But yeah, what's crazy? There were like 2 times where I scored what would be 3-pointers in like 5 or 6 minutes at the end of a game. And so my friend was like, man, if they had 3-pointers, you would scored like 20-something points. I wasn't that good. I wasn't disciplined enough to play basketball. I just liked it.
Who was your team growing up?
Oh man, the Celtics. Like that's how I roll. Yeah.
So you created your game after Larry Bird, maybe a little bit?
That's the thing. I like the Celtics. Of course, everyone liked Jordan, right? I like Dominique Wilkins. Sean Kemp was amazing. Rex Chapman, if people remember, played for Kentucky because I could jump, man. White Chocolate, what was his name? Jason Williams. Like I like that whole crew too. So it wasn't that old. I was young when Bird played. And I used to think, who's this corny white dude? But then as I got older, I realized, man, Bird could ball. I think Jason Tatum just said he's the greatest Celtic, is Larry Bird.
Yeah. You probably remember, was it Mahmoud Rauf? Am I saying his name correctly?
Yeah, it's a good friend of mine too. Very good friend of my family.
Yeah. So he was Kaepernick before Kaepernick. Nobody remembers that.
Absolutely. Chris Jackson. Yeah.
Do you remember the impact of that time?
I was in high school, and that whole era, that's the era of like Nirvana, Public Enemy, Rage Against the Machine, Beavis and Butthead. Like it's a very anti kind of moment, GNR. And so I just remember thinking like, this guy's got guts, man. and really being impressed because you had this two-sided coin when it came to Islam. You had him and then you had a Hakim. And so Hakim's like fasting and winning the MVP in 95, I think. And then you have former Chris Jackson, who was butter at LSU with Shaq. And now he's like Muslim and he's not standing for the anthem. The spiritual component and resistance is like converging in a way that for at least a generation extra, I was like, this is cool, man. Yeah, don't stand, bro. And then Hakeem, I heard a story that the night he won the championship, the next day he was a Fajr
Inshallah.
in the masjid. So that was a cool time, man. Not to get too nostalgic, but Chris Jackson, Mahmoud, the beauty of both of them, Mahmoud has not changed, man. Still who he is.
I think you said this in some of the research that I read over, that being Muslim was cool at some point. Like it was a cool thing, maybe in the 80s or 90s.
So I became Muslim kind of before that. I became Muslim really through a good friend who unfortunately passed away when we were young. And we used to smoke copious amounts of weed, man, after high school. And he was Muslim. And then it was like through there, I was like, why do you hate white people? Why are y'all crazy? We were young kids, man, like 17, 18. And so he really like explained to me, and then reading Malcolm's autobiography, the end, becoming aware of a universal kind of community opened up my mind to see a little different. Like as a white man, when you read Malcolm, you're being interrogated, right? And it's not a bad thing, right? In any instance in our life, being interrogated, as long as it's not unjust, can be an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
So I remember reading and saying, this dude is crazy. I'm not no devil. You know, like I was reading, like I was like arguing with Malcolm. But then ultimately at the end, what Malcolm does offer is responsible redemption for society. He comes to terms with that in a way. Those are the things that's pushed on those moments, if you will.
Yeah. You were a hip hop DJ, a producer, you were part of a gang. It boggles my mind how you were able to make it out of all of that. And I think to an extent, learn from those experiences in a way that you're able to apply it to today's world too. I think you have a unique perspective that many imams won't have just because the experiences growing up in Oklahoma, for example, in a gang.
I think a lot of that is because, and we don't talk about this enough, is that a lot of times young men, even if their fathers are present, they're not present with their presence. God bless my father, he passed on, but I didn't really have a male rudder in my life, so to speak. And so I think what happens is you start to look for reflections of identity in ways that may be healthy or unhealthy. And so D-Loc, he was a gang member. He was a Muslim. He's a Sunni Muslim, just like wild. I would say we weren't like, it's nothing like The Wire or something. We're like wannabes in Oklahoma, man, selling drugs, not like Scarface. And crack came to Oklahoma because it was cheap. And so then it came to Oklahoma because there it was more expensive. Drug dealers came from LA. Different gangs came, street gangs came to Oklahoma, 456 Pomona, Piru, 107 Hoover, Rolling 60s Crips. And our whole school was blood, like our whole high school was blood. So you didn't really have a choice. And they were like, yeah, this white boy gonna be a blood. Okay, I guess I'm a blood now. I don't want to exaggerate that experience. I did see some crazy stuff. I saw people use crack. I saw a guy get shot, over $125,000 cash in a car. I'm 16 years old. Like, what the heck is going on in the world, man? But that also allowed me to appreciate spiritually the instability of life through those moments. And then I was into music. I learned to play piano and saxophone when I was younger. And then I got into hip hop in like 7th grade, like Houdini, Grandmaster Flash, Run DMC, the B-boy culture, everything.
You're aging us way too much here.
Sorry, man. And this is the very early ages of hip hop. And we used to just try to mimic, in the Midwest, sometimes you're trying to mimic the East and the West.
Yeah.
And then I got into producing. And then 2 of the guys I produced, their names were Latif and Hamza. And they actually had a Quran in the studio, man. They were not Muslim. It was so weird. And I was like, why is it here? You know how Christians put the Bible in the car? We put the Quran in the studio. So strange, right? The Muslims right here, this what? But I started reading the Quran in the studio. For people who embraced Islam in America, at least out of the 90s, Malcolm is like a shadow that casts over us as like our sheikh, right? Our guide. And we probably live vicariously through him in ways that are not acceptable, but it's just romanticized. It is what it is. And so I was shocked when I read the Quran. But Islam was cool at that time. Right after that, like you had Q-Tip, Lauryn Hill, Mahmoud, Hakeem, Tyson. You had all these kind of people of influence who were like, at that time, dedicated to like Islam in certain ways. And then hip hop itself was laced with these pseudo Islamic terminologies, right? Which I think October 7th exposed were maybe more about entertainment than actual investment, to be honest with you. Because where are those people on Palestine? They're crickets.
Yeah.
So, but at that time, we didn't know that. This is crazy. We're Muslim. We don't even listen to this stuff. But these guys are saying like, Inshallah, Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a good time.
I'm going to go ahead and just get this question out of the way, if that's okay with you. Greatest rapper of all time, or hip hop artist of all time?
So there's a difference between an MC and an artist.
Fair enough.
And I come from an era where lyrics were very important. So I would say Rakim is the one who changed everything, in the sense before Rakim, it was very much like Cab Calloway, crowd cheering hip hop. But Rakim comes and just, he's talking about stuff. Like we would listen to Rakim and go to the library, man. You know, like Rakim is one of the first people I ever heard talk about Mecca and Medina and the ghetto. He has a song called The Ghetto where he talks about, you know, being born. And that song is like I think it's like a 5% Nation kind of meditation thing. So I think sometimes a great MC is the one that ripples outside of the beat, right? You find yourself over here somewhere now. And so Rakim was like really the first person I heard. And I was like, this guy's teaching me something, man. He actually sent me a can. It's very interesting, an autographed can. He said, Salaam alaikum on the can. Of anyone that's going to send you a can of Sprite. I don't know why, how that happened, but I appreciate it. But I would say from that era, Rakim, the next era would be Nas. And then I think the next era is Lupe. And now, of course, you have Halftime.
Kendrick?
Yeah, I guess Kendrick. People are saying Kendrick. I haven't really listened to him in that way. I don't have time. I got too many kids, man. But
Yeah.
I try to keep my ear to the streets.
Yeah, I hear that. So when I think about your story a little bit, I'm sure you've watched Good Will Hunting before. Have you ever watched it?
Unfortunately, no.
With Matt Damon? Okay.
So there's this time when I became Muslim. My wife makes fun of me. I basically went into the Shaolin Temple, and I know nothing about 90s pop culture.
Gotcha.
Up until 2015, it's just blank. She actually makes fun of me because she's also Lebanese. So she's like, how are you unaware of this Arab culture where you're living in Egypt and then you're unaware of like American culture? I was like, yo, I was in the dojo, man. Like I was trying to get mine. So I missed Good Will Hunting, but tell me about it.
So it was based in Massachusetts. Matt Damon, the main person in the movie, was basically a troublemaker. Would always get into fights, would go out drinking, but he was an avid reader. He was super smart. He was super into the books. And he was always trying to learn something new. There was a complicated math problem. He would go on the whiteboard and sort of work out that math problem where nobody else could. So as I'm listening to you and as I was reading about you, I'm like, this guy had to be in his room reading all the time and studying. You mentioned Malcolm X.
So it's crazy. I actually had serious dyslexia as a child and was a Ritalin baby. Typical Generation X stuff, man. So my mom took me to a reading clinic when I was like 6, the whole summer, man. So I just had like learn how to read. And I had this great teacher. I remember her name was Amy. God bless her, man. She was an amazing teacher. At that time, I think she was a college student, probably just getting her degree. And so that really got me reading and got me reading well. And so I found a lot of meaning in reading. And then I realized, I know Will Smith said something like, every issue you run into, you can find an answer in a book one way or another. So reading for us was like what social media is now for people, right? Like books were something that we relied on. I remember like my mom saying, oh, we have to drive to the library and look up this word. Like now nobody has to do that. And that's the 90s, that's the 80s. It's not prehistoric time. I always found I'm doing something right if I'm surrounded by books and I'm reading them, right? And not just looking at them.
Did you have struggles learning as well or paying attention in class?
Absolutely, yeah, man.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I would get bored very easily in classrooms. My father told me, I came home one day in first grade, he's like, why don't you pay attention? I'm like, she talks to us like we're babies. And he was like, no, but you gotta play the part, bro. So after a while, I learned how to conform to the expectations. My children go to like Waldorf schools that are outside. And I don't see kids outside having some of the problems we had, locked up in those small rooms with those heat lamps on our head like we're French fries, you know, at a BDS compliant place. And I just felt like, I don't think it's right also how I felt. Like I needed to be disciplined in a way. But I just remember at that time feeling like, man, there's more than this, dude. And so I would always ask questions like, but what does a semicolon mean? The teachers would get mad at me. And I was like, what does a colon mean? Like, why are you stopping? And so they were like, dude, just shut up, bro. Just the colon, man, the semicolon. Man. And so that was a little bit of a challenge. But as I got into high school and I had good teachers, I did a little better. But it was in college, actually in the madrasa, like when I went into the Islamic classical system, that I was able to focus more.
Yeah. So talk about you converting or reverting rather to Islam and what that sort of moment was like for you when you realized, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna talk to my parents, and I'm gonna go through this process and revert.
Not talk to my parents is the better way of phrasing it. So I was young when Rodney King happened, and I was in Egypt during the real Arab Spring, and I felt very angry to see this happening. And not anger in the sense of like white guilt, which sometimes I feel exercises itself in very problematic ways, but more just like, what the hell's wrong with people, man? And then I came out of an experience within, and we see this now with the hypocrisy of the evangelicals and the far-right Catholics, that I will go to church and it's like freaking white Jesus, dude, on the wall. I say this respectfully to people. And I was like, no wonder you think you're freaking supreme, dude. God is white. And I, as a young person, like I came to the conclusion, like God is not a person. And so my mother, I would ask her questions like, about God and stuff, and she would get perplexed, but your mother always going to be there for you, right? And when I saw that happen, I was very spiritual. I was very spiritually inclined, even as a child. Oklahoma, we grew up with tornadoes, man. One of my first memories is my father running with me to a cellar and hearing that in the 70s. And I was just angry, man. And I also had a problem with the fact that America hasn't solved the race problem. At its core, we're humans. Can't we just get to our humanity? And I looked at secular humanism and realized it's very bleached, right? The exposure is set on, you look at it still through a very white lens. And what I mean by white is whiteness as a construct, not white people. And so I had that friend that I was talking to him, and then I was reading the Quran, and then we're listening to like Public Enemy and Paris. Paris had a song called Bush Killer. It was a little deep, right? Like in the sense of some of the messaging, X-Clan, even the Beastie Boys, like they're like flamboyant, fun B-boys, but there's still like this kind of rebelliousness to them. Then I was into also metal. Like I snuck into GNR concerts and Smashing Pumpkins, and I was backstage with Axl Rose. And so I had this kind of rebellion in me, but I knew that it needed to be directed or I was going to go into like heathenry. And then my friend got shot and killed. I saw a drive-by shooting. Some of my friends got arrested for selling organic pharmaceuticals. And then I was just like, man, I got to find something that's going to give me footing. And so then I met this Muslim man in a flea market from Brooklyn. He had this big turban and a thoban. That's like the first scholar I met, the sage, the Rizza. And he just started dropping bolos on me, bro. Rodney King happened because people don't know Allah. And I was like, but isn't Allah black? He's like, Allah ain't black. Boom, boom, just going. And he was like, Allah is transcendent. I was like, what is I don't know what transcendent meant. And he was like, beyond time and space, the creator of all things, not restricted. And he's like, the people are killing each other over race because subliminally their race is their God. Like he started just dropping it, man. And so that's when that Sheikh Abdurrahman, may Allah have mercy on him, he died with COVID from Marcy, from Brooklyn. That was my guide, man. That was the door. Boom. And then I was like, yeah, this makes sense. And so that's how I became Muslim.
Didn't your parents ask you a question, sort of like, are you going to become a terrorist now?
Yeah, so I didn't tell my parents. You have to think about this. There was no TikTok. There was no even AIM. Right? There was no community. There was no MySpace. So being a new Muslim at that time was very much so an acute sense of isolation. And even having to navigate how I rolled in the Muslim community, because like, here's a 6'4" white dude, man, showing up at a Desi masjid. Like either he's ICE, not ICE, but like immigration official, FBI, stuff going on, right? Although they were so loving, mashallah, they were amazing. So I had to be careful because some of them knew my father. They were his colleagues on campus. I was really a little bit on the DL. And Then I had all these friends, and I was supposed to go to New York with this production company and get to work and take on a lot of projects that were going to bring my commitment to faith into question. And I knew when I became Muslim, I thought I was Muslim before I was Muslim. I didn't know about like how there's a formal ceremony or nothing, man. I just don't eat pork, don't smoke weed, don't drink. And then I learned, no, there's like more to this. So when I became Muslim, I didn't tell my parents for quite a while. Then I told them, and then they asked me, are you going to kill us? Are you Hamas? Are you all these other groups? I didn't even know who these groups were. I was not very geopolitically savvy. And then I explained to them, no, like what kind of religion would encourage someone to kill their parents? Yeah.
Did you find it ironic that's the perspective that they held, yet they encourage you to read Malcolm X?
I mean, I think that's the neoliberal. I mean, Mark Lamont Hill has that book, The Limit of Progressive Politics, right, in Palestine. I think oftentimes, and that's why this election really exposed that hypocrisy, and that there's intersection between justice and injustice that you can't ignore. I think Dr. Cornel West said, nothing reveals hypocrisy like the claim of being a just person. And that also shook me. Here's my parents, they're like really pretty chill people, but they have a fundamental issue with Islam, in particular with the Arab sort of perspective of Islam. So that sort of further isolated me in a way, you know what I mean? Like in a sense of that shocked me. But I think also over time, I realized for them, it was about theology. Like we got beyond all that. Once they met my friends and like they had some baklava, man, and, you know, were around people. Unfortunately, it's sad that people need to be around people to humanize them. That's really sad. But that did change. My brother now is totally watermelon team, bro. Team watermelon for life, right? Which I would have never imagined. I think sometimes also a challenge that we have is we're quick to like designate people irredeemable. So one thing I learned with my parents is, man, I had to be patient, man. Because at the end of the day, we're my parents. And I was not financially independent, so I needed them. Although my dad is old school, when I turned 18, he was like, bye. Like, why are you here? And so I struggled a lot with them, man. They may have thought they were struggling with me, but I was like trying to explain to them. Like one time I walked in the kitchen and Ariel Sharon was on, and I was like, you know, Ibn Sittina Kalb. You know, like I said it, and my mom's like, what does that mean? It's like, how do I translate? It's like son of 60, you know what I'm saying? Like, wow, right? And she's like, oh my God, but he wants peace. And I was like, a piece of bleep. And then we started going at it. And then as she was talking, I just realized like she had no idea of the situation on the ground. And so I had a friend from Gaza, Abdul Hayy. That's my man. He passed away, Allah yarhamu, made the best spicy hummus, man. And he would call my mom, dude. And she'd be like, Miss Webb, how are you? Mrs. Webb, how are you? Do you need anything? So like this big Ghazan, man, right? OG Ghazan is like calling, just checking in on my mom. Even when I moved out of Oklahoma, he would call and check in on my mom. And that stuff, man, we have to sometimes invest in people when we want to see change. So it took a while, man. But they thought, yeah, in the very beginning, they were concerned, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious, when did you first hear about Palestine?
So I think I heard about Palestine in the first Intifada, right? I was young then, and I thought it was dope. When I was young, it was obvious, man. I grew up watching Star Wars, dude. So I knew the Warriors come out to play. And then hip hop also allowed me to appreciate and Malcolm and then even other people. I read the Eldridge Cleaver, Soul on Ice. I read The Wretched of the Earth. I also knew white people, sometimes we have this propensity to like think we got it. And like now we're redeemed. And I also don't want to make white people feel like perpetually guilty. I think that's also an issue. But I was aware, like I have work to do on myself, how I live, how I spend my money. Chuck D has this great line, I like Nike, well, wait a minute, the neighborhood plays a part, so put some money in it. We came out of that. So when I saw what was happening in Palestine, I was like, this is a grave injustice, right? And the odds set against these people and what they're having to deal with as a 20th century Southern colony. I knew that very early on. I was like, this is the freaking Puritans, man, although they're not pure. I was upset about it. I just didn't know. I think sometimes people don't realize we see the Zionist state, even when you're not Muslim or you're not involved in the Arab, you see them as insurmountable. You see them as like this freaking, it's like Star Wars, man. They're ubiquitous in sort of their power structures and how things happen. And we see that in the United States, people from professors to MCs to everyone has their jobs threatened, students on campus. I could care less. Alhamdulillah, I'm just saying. So I realized that very early on. So I felt like, and then I met Abdul Hayy, man. That's my man. I met Abdul Hayy at the masjid. And I went to the masjid, it was like my second or third time. This big Palestinian dude. He's like, come to my house. And I was like, man, I'm finna go hang out with this Arab dude in this house, man. This is gonna be amazing. And then I went in, he was like, eat this. Right? I didn't speak Arabic, that's what he was telling me.
Yeah.
And he would always speak with me Fusha. He's like, I don't want you to learn like Palestinian dialect or whatever. I was like, Mashi. And so then he had a big picture of Masjid al-Aqsa on his wall. We would talk and he told me, I'm a refugee, I can't go back. My mom's there, I haven't seen her in 20 years. Da, da, da. So by meeting Palestinians, when you hear the actual story, that also gives you like a perspective that you're seeing this happen. And so meeting him, and then there were other Palestinians in the community. Mufid Abdul Qadir was in that mosque, who was with the Holy Land, just got out. As a new Muslim, not seeing your mom for 20 years, bro. That's like being in prison, but you're not in prison. It's so strange. You can't go back to where you were born. And then we had an imam, his grandma had the key to the house. And so I was able to like 5 years, 6 years later, experience the human side of that story at a deeper level.
Did you ever think you're going to see what you're seeing today, post October 7th, where a lot of fake people essentially revealed themselves?
Man, they tried to recruit me, man. When I came back from Egypt, I think pre-MLI, a lot of us, again, didn't have the experience to know the depths of how it works. One of the problems with Muslims, and I say this respectfully, not to all Muslims, but I'll say for me, is that we find ourselves constantly in a position, and maybe you can relate to this too, at least for a while, of needing to explain ourselves in order to be tolerated, not accepted. And that's so problematic, right? But then Tahir from American Muslims for Palestine, this is my man. He called me, he's like, bro, you're gonna sell out, bro. And I was like, what do you mean? We're trying to do good. He's like, this ain't good. Do you see Palestinians in the room? And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting played like a game in a PlayStation store. And so like, he actually saved me. I don't know if I could have ever forgiven myself, bro. And that actually made me more angry. You know what I mean? Alhamdulillah, I didn't do anything wrong. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It wasn't MLI. I don't think we understand how people move through communities that are desperate to be accepted or need allies. And so I remember people would contact me. Yeah, I have this venture capitalist guy who just wants to make all this media for the Muslim community for free. I was like, nah, bro, ain't nobody doing nothing for free. And then what happened with George Floyd, and I was in Boston, and I started to see cracks for issues for which there is no moral dilemma, even amongst us, man. And then when I saw Muslims writing op-eds saying, I'm a Zionist, and I'm just like, look, man, for me, there are certain things that are non-negotiable in the Muslim community. They're like sacred. Kashmir, Palestine, Black folks, and the struggles of Black folks in America because of Malcolm. We are the spiritual children of Malcolm. His nephew is on the board of my school, man. Like I went to his house and he was like, that chair you're sitting in, that's where Malcolm sat. So I wasn't surprised because theologically we have this idea of tamyiz, which is in the Quran, which means to filter and separate. And even in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the Quran, there are these moments that happen, like the changing of the Kaaba, the Isra, the night journey, where he loses followers. And it hurts, but sometimes it's a necessary blessing. And I never trusted like the left, to be honest with you. I always felt that they had certain limits. And then I used to say when I lived in New York, the worst Republican is establishment Democrat. But I knew on Palestine that they're a bunch of fakers, man.
Yeah.
And I was surprised in the sense by those who acted like they were able to make decisions for which there's no moral dilemma. But then I was also pleased by people like my brother and these students, man, this Generation Z, and just the galvanizing of kind of public sort of censorship of what's going on. But then the inability of the Biden administration to even move 1 inch. I wasn't really surprised by any of it.
You were at GW, correct? You gave a speech?
Yeah. And I was at the University of Maryland just last week with SJP. And I ran into Cory Booker one time in a convenience store on 95, bro. He's actually a very tall guy. I didn't realize how tall he was. I think Rosario had broken up with him, so he was in a bad mood, man. He was in a bad mood, right? Then he turned around and saw me, and I look like, he turned around and saw me. He sees like Hacksaw Jim Duggan or something, bro. And then I'm like, hey, Senator Boker. He's like, yeah. I was like, you need to call for a ceasefire. And he ran, bro. Literally ran to his car. And I was like, man, this is like the Quran says, جَعَلُوا أَصَابِعَهُمْ فِي آذَانِهِمْ وَاسْتَغْشَوْا ثِيَابَهُم. They don't want to hear the truth. They'll put their fingers in the ears. They'll cover. I went to Hakeem Jeffries' office. And again, it's an unnecessary situation that people are tolerating in the sense of there's no moral dilemma. But then also it allows us not to get deceived by people who just smile at our face and eat hummus and say salam alaikum and all that stuff. And also I saw with Linda, when Linda was becoming like an iconic figure in America, you'd see Linda Sarsour, may Allah bless her, she's a good friend of mine. You would see her like in New York, man. Linda was everywhere on billboards, and the attack was so orchestrated. And I experienced this in Boston. The attack can come in different waves. I always felt that it was good because that shows you once again who's who.
But you got attacked on both sides of the aisle, right? You got attacked by Muslims, and then you got attacked by non-Muslims who claimed for you to be a terrorist. How did you reconcile that? How did you navigate it?
Yeah, and even under the Obama administration, the Boston bombing, I was supposed to speak, and the night before, I'm replaced by some unknown guy. And at that moment, I began to realize that America is very much at a power level wanting to domesticate the presentation of Islam and others, not just us, but there are other communities that they want to domesticate. Mark Lamont Hill, right? He comes out and says something truthful, and now he's not on CNN anymore. Now CNN's upset that the press corps is going to get changed and moved around, and this is censorship. But you guys did this to Mark Lamont Hill just because he said from the river to the sea and spoke with facts, spoke brilliantly, spoke as a professor, spoke as a scholar. So I began once again to return to my Gen X 90s, 80s roots, especially under the hypocrisy of I never fully trusted him, but the Obama experience. I was in Egypt when he gave the famous speech. That day we were supposed to have exams in Azhar. They actually closed the university, man. I went there for my exams. They're like, we're closed. And then I was there in the Arab Spring when he let them down and continued to support autocrats. So yeah, I don't necessarily deal with it. I just feel like it's part of the process. If you're a public figure or if you're out there in that way, you're going to say something that's going to make somebody angry. And you can always judge people by how they get angry at you. Like, unless you know you're like really ratchet and evil. So then that would justify being dealt with in that way. But during even like the Boston bombing, like there were multiple things said on all sides that we never did. Like they said those guys were in our mosque. They weren't in our mosque. Some Muslims said I refused to pray for the bomber, which is not true. Everyone has a right to be buried. To realize, man, you just got to worry about what people closest to you say. The externals, unless it's 80%, 90%, 75%, 60% of people saying, that's something you should pay attention to. But when it's just some periphery stuff, man, don't give them the energy of your orbit because it takes away from you and sort of limits what you can do.
That's right on. You mentioned Egypt. What does Egypt mean to you?
It's weird. I feel like Egypt is home, man, because I lived there almost 8 years. I did my studies there. I met really good friends. They say innaha madrasatul mustaqillah, like it's its own independent sort of school, like living in Egypt. And then I was there when the Arab Spring happened and the Egyptians jumped on board with the Arab Spring, inspired by the Tunisians and the Syrians. And it's cool to see like freedom FOMO or something, like fear of missing freedom. So that's one thing I realized at that moment, like the power of social media. That was before we appreciated. Well, the first thing Mubarak does is that morning, boom, we don't even know what's going on because whatever happened, it's in the news. We don't know. And what turned from like a few small protests to everyone going to Tahrir. Why did everyone go to Tahrir? We didn't have any phones. Like, how do you get information? So people are now going to congregate. They're going to make up. Social evolution is going to compel them. And just seeing like Egyptians like euphoric, man. I ran into a Friday guy giving a sermon. He's like, this is the first Friday I can say what I want to say. And then all that's happening in the backdrop of Park 57. What was it? New York City, the mosque in New York City that they were they tried to protest it being built in Manhattan. And so these things are all happening. And so Egypt is like home, man, to me in a way.
Yeah.
I left a lot of my life in Egypt.
So that's the majority of your training was in Egypt?
So the majority of my training was with a West African teacher from Senegal.
Okay.
When I first embraced Islam for 10 years. And then in Egypt, I would say like Hogwarts is Egypt, yeah.
How were you able to translate that world into Western language? If that makes any sense.
I struggle with that. Actually, I failed to do that when I first came back, just because like when you live somewhere, you also learn the language of the culture. The Quran says, we did not send a messenger except bi lisani qawmi. It doesn't say the speech. The lisan implies all the cultural components of that speech. So when I first came back, I struggled to synthesize the two. Because living in the Muslim world, it's almost like what Spike Lee says about Morehouse. Like he felt comfortable as a Black man the first time he was on campus. I think as a Muslim, you feel really comfortable. And then sometimes it may be deceiving, right? But just being around that world. And actually I had a young man come to me when I lived in the Bay Area, and he was like, before you left, you were too hip. When you first came back, you were too academic. And now you've hit this sweet spot. Keep that. He was a young teenage kid. He told me, like, keep that sweet spot, right? So I think there's trial and error. It's hard sometimes. But now I'm so far removed from Egypt, it would probably be a reverse if I went back. How do I readjust to life there? But it took a few years and a lot of mistakes. And I think still trying to make the most of that.
Do they still call you the Snapchat Imam?
I kind of pulled away from that at that time. You know, I come from a training that's very interesting where public exposure is not something commendable necessarily. It may be a necessary evil. So people ask, like, why did you pull away from Snapchat? It just got too big for me. I was like, dude, like, I was very uncomfortable. I didn't do that in the sense of selfishness. I just did it in the sense of I didn't feel that it was authentic. And I started to worry about the vanity involved in it, and probably should have kept going, but hindsight's 2020. I'm actually a very introverted person. That's, publicly is different than privately. I also received death threats, ISIS, and then also the far right. The death threats from the far right in America have been insane. And so at that time, the FBI showed up at my house on 14th and V back in the days by Howard. Shout out to Howard and U Street and Busboys and Poets and all that. And so the FBI, you could tell by the suits, the shoulder pads and whatnot, and the ties. And they were like, yeah, we need to look at your windows and examine your home because there may be a sniper that's going to try to take you out. And so I was like, yo, man, I'm good. I'm so good right now. And unfortunately, the Muslim community is not in a place to protect you.
Yeah.
And we saw that with Linda. And I even had some people from the Nation of Islam offer to do security for me, a white dude. Whereas our own community are too busy, I don't know, man, arguing about big issues, but then neglecting local issues. And so I realized, man, hey, I got 4 kids, man. I'm not trying to get offed here. And so I thought I could do things in a different way. So that's why I pulled away from it, but I still get people like, I have non-Muslims pull me over. Hey, are you a Snapchat imam? I was like, yeah.
But you embraced technology, I think, sooner than a lot of other imams. You had a blog out, I think, at one point, that one blog of the year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we had 160 people working on that blog at one time. Maybe 50 interns, high school interns in the mid-2000s under Maria and Rhonda and Sheikh Shibli. And there's a lot of people. It had my name on it because that website started in like 2002 with that name. So eventually we changed it to Virtual Mosque, which has shut down, I think now for about 8 years. They closed it. I heard something one time from Sheikh Bulti, and he said when the Prophet climbed up, alayhi salam, climbed up to this hill to spread the message, we should think about technology as that hill. I think that the challenge is, are we intentional in using technology for the right reasons? Like it's for God, it's not for us. Right? Are we more caught up with the likes of creation or the like of the creator? And I think sometimes in activism that can happen, at least from a theological perspective. But I do believe like, yeah, you have to be sort of using technology, or like I refuse to use TikTok. And then my oldest was like, Dad, you got to be there. And I remember 2 nights after I joined, it was 76,000 people. And I was like, what the heck is this thing? This is crazy. And I do like it. We all like the attention. We'd be lying if we said we didn't. But I do want to be careful of my spiritual state, even on issues like Palestine, how I push in.
So we're not going to see you dancing on TikTok, to be clear, right?
I could do the dubka with you, bro.
There we go. I don't think you want us to do the depth go. We probably have to get somebody else to help us.
I got no cartilage in my right leg, so it might not work out well.
Same here. Same here. So talk a little bit about your educational philosophy. I think one time you gave a talk using Breaking Bad as a reference and then 50 Shades of Grey. When did you realize, hey, you know what? You talked about it earlier where you found that balance, right? Where did you realize, you know what? I'm going to use what's on TV, what's in the movies as a way to apply knowledge to today.
I did 50 Shades of Grey.
That's what the research says.
That is so cringe, man. God. Wow.
You don't remember that?
I think I probably want to forget it. So when I was in Boston was a unique opportunity. I almost treated it like an experiment to see, could I force myself to synthesize Islam within the American cultural needs, but not in a way that those needs then brought to question the orthodoxy. We think about Bloom's taxonomy. This taxonomy is synthesis. If you can synthesize, then that means you really anta fahmin koyis, like you understand well, right? So when I became imam in Boston, I took all this skill set that I had and I wanted to try to employ it and test myself and push myself. Because I believe like imams, you got to keep pushing yourself. That's why I use a lot of social media, keep me limber. And so I decided after the Boston bombing with some of my colleagues, I'm going to try to do stuff that isn't just for Muslims. Like, is it possible that this masjid, this Islamic center, which has a great staff, great community, amazing Somali people, amazing place, is it possible that we can seamlessly inject Islam into the veins of America without any bumps? What I meant was, can I talk about issues like recidivity? I did gentrification with a J, how not to be a gentrifier. I don't see myself as left or right. I'm Muhammadi. And so being Muhammadi, I'm emancipated from the secular nomenclature of the left and the right. Because at the end of the day, we're socially conservative or socially liberal and politically conservative. We're kind of in this weird place. I think Muslims can heal the pain of America now because we're that vital center that balances out the extremes on right and left. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to do like topics, and I said, will the press cover this? In the sense of how they cover like Osteen, T.D. Jakes, but without selling out, right? Just talking about the issues that are important to America from that pulpit. And so that's why I did that. And that's what happened. CNN covered it. They covered the Breaking Bad khutbah. And that's why I got attacked, because anyone, and I got this from the people in the Obama administration, we don't want Islam to be palatable to American people. Islam needs to be weird. Islam needs to be strange. And so you got this dude from Oklahoma that can quote Chuck D and drop Nietzsche on you and then bring it in with Rumi and do Azhar and talk about this and that, and Hank Williams Jr. And man, this is a problem. So I only wasn't attacked by the right, I was attacked by the left, brutally. Then I realized the reaction to this means this must be prophetic. There must be good in this, right? If you're getting them all angry, I'm not up there talking about jihad and killing people and all that crazy stuff, man. They want that. Noam Chomsky said that the Israeli government constantly targeted the moderate Palestinian political leadership because they knew the moderate Palestinian leadership would be galvanizing for the masses because it appeals to the masses. And so I wanted to experiment not only with, could it work, which it did, but then who's going to react? And that's what shocked me, man. That it was like, hey, everybody was pissed off. Except the Muslims, the community was amazing. And then people would say, I can bring my non-Muslim coworker to the mosque now and not have to have another khutbah after the khutbah. Like this khutbah is all they needed. They're with us. They're listening. And so that's what I wanted to see happen. So that's why if you look at that phase in my life, I'm like testing this. How do you seamlessly, because at the end of the day, this is where I'm from. I'm here. I'm Irish. I ain't going back to Ireland. And although I wish, but here, like I have a prophetic responsibility to work with and also hold accountable myself and the world that I live in.
Yeah. I want to make you feel better here. When you did the 50 Shades of Grey speech or talk, it was addressing the erosion of ethical clarity. I want to help you out there. So there was good meaning there. All good.
All right, good. Okay. Yeah. So there you go. Because that movie was like wild, man. And like, when is Western society going to get over nudity? This is ridiculous. It's the constant, the objectification of women. That's a whole other issue. But even people like D'Angelo, the great R&B singer, he said that what really impacted him is that video where he was forced to go out with no clothes on, man. People can't get enough of this. What's beyond this? So I remember when I did that, actually, you reminded me, it's like morally, we're so shallow, man. Looking at a screen with a bunch of naked people, doesn't that get boring? Outside of being sinful for us, like, isn't there more to life than things like this?
Speaking of that, what do you think the biggest issues are facing this generation of youth?
I don't know. I think we need to listen to them, man. I'm not from that generation. I really appreciate them. They vibe with Generation X. I don't know if you noticed that.
Old souls. Old souls.
Old souls, but also like brave, and not that Generation X is perfect, but there's something about them. Maybe some of my kids are Generation Z too. I would like to sit down and hear from them what their challenges are. I think a challenge for everyone is the age of angst and the age of exhibition. Everybody's mad. Okay, fine. Like, we're all mad. And some of us should be mad, right? But when are we going to move beyond feeling accomplished by sharing angst on social media that doesn't lead to any measurable, quantifiable change? And then how does that lead into spiritual, like ostentationalism? I can just do this and get this attention, but I'm not really doing, I'm not on the ground, right? I'm not there. I remember years ago, I was talking to an activist in Chicago, and I was like, why aren't you on social media? He's like, I don't have time. Just running back and forth to this and this. But I think this age of exhibition and being part of this monoculture that in some ways is untethered from deeper meaning is a threat to all of us. And that's why we see it's easy to dehumanize people so fast now. And I think that's a challenge that we all are going to have to come to grips with.
The energy changes, though, when it's in person. They can talk a lot of trash on social media, but when you see them in person, the energy changes pretty quickly. I don't know if you've experienced that.
What did Tyson say? Everybody's a something.
Yeah.
I'm not going to quote him until they get hit in the face.
Right.
And we don't want to hit people in the face. But I always thought everybody's something until you say hi.
Yeah.
Like, it's true. You just see someone in person. We've all met people in person, even people that we don't like. I'm sure you've done it. And they're very different. They're not as unlikable, or maybe even more unlikable than they were in person. They say never meet your hero in person because they'll let you down, but never meet your enemy in person because they'll let you up. And I think we may see a move back towards deliberate community, even if they're small. The mega church and the mega mosque sort of coincided with Super Size Me at the BDS band establishment. But now, maybe as a reaction to all of this false, shallow kind of sense of being, people will push into smaller, deliberate communities. There was a church in San Diego. He wrote a book called Sticky Churches, and he talks about how small groups really changed the dynamic of his community, being very deliberate about being present, being in person. Today, I took my daughter, she's 5, and we were late for school. And I said, let's just go get coffee together, right? She wanted cocoa, not coffee, of course. And her mother didn't know because I would be dead. And
she's going to know now.
Yeah, I told her. But as we were having coffee, she said, Baba, I love this time with you. You know what I mean? And that's why it's called present. This technocratic age is really contributing to how we dehumanize one another. As one person told me, swiping right and looking at women has caused me not to see them as women anymore, but as a swipe. We swipe bugs. There's a lot happening here, right? And I think maybe the move is going to push into deliberate community. And then we see the extremes on the right and left, because they're not really interacting at a human level. The human responsibilities, and they're all online or all talking and engaged in this and that theory, and this is happening and that and this. But when we're around people, Saul Alinsky had something to say about how churches and mosques and synagogues and temples mitigate people, because you have this experience of being irresponsible.
There are 2 quotes that are attributed to you. I hope this is accurate, but I'd like you to unpack it a little bit. You said Muslim youth feel they must reject their American identity to be truly Muslim. Do you think that's still the case?
Who quoted that?
I would have to go back and look. It was a quote we pulled.
I don't know if I said that. I would change that if I said that. I would say this, that we have to reject political theology to be accepted in the United States. and that we are in some ways conditioned. Islamophobia is the attempt to condition Muslims' public participation. And at a greater level, Islamophobia wants to not only condition that, but condition how we participate with Islam in our own homes, privately. And so I think that there is a pressure to reject, at times, the side of justice. And in many ways, how many times we hear in American politics, oh, don't talk about this. You'll never get anywhere. I taught in the academy for 6 years, and someone came and told me, don't post about Palestine. This is before October 7th, right? I think rejection may be a strong word, condition, with the goal of utility and agency. So if you play this part, we can guarantee you this. I had a guy one time tell me, he was a Fox News guy. He told me if I apostated, he would make me a millionaire. So there's always a carrot, right? And so I think maybe a better word is, instead of reject, modify, condition, adapt. And our community hasn't scaled in a way that we can offer people real career opportunity. So within a capitalist system, if you're not able to sustain people financially, it's hard to keep them down. Let's just be honest, right? People got bills to pay. People got to be smart, right? I was on a campus a few weeks ago, and students were asking me, like, should we sacrifice our academic future for what's going on? I said, absolutely not. You need to be smart. Get your hustle on, and then you can be more dedicated. So maybe rejection is a tough word I use, but I think modify in ways that are irreligious.
And I'll send you that source after the interview. The other one that you had there, and I hope this is correct, is Islam is not microwaved, it's baked.
Yeah, I think sometimes we want to have a quick result. And we can learn a lot from the community of Imam Muhammad, Imam Deputy Muhammad. We can even learn a lot from the nation of Islam and see how they've evolved and grown in different ways. Other religious communities. There's a great historian who worked with Manning Marble on the Malcolm biography, Brother Zahir Ali. He used to be at the Brooklyn Museum of History, I believe. And he told me something one time. He said, religious communities in America that have completely acclimated have disappeared, or have completely rejected have been isolated. But it's those that are in the middle and balance fidelity to text with contextual adaptability, which doesn't contradict that text, that succeed. And so I think that quote is what I'm getting at. This is a process, not an event, man. And our community is so diverse and so broad that there's not a myopic definition of Muslims in America. I like to tell people there's Muslims and there's Islams. I don't mean Islams in the sense of orthodoxy, so people don't get it twisted, but how we express this Islam at a cultural level and even a linguistic level at times is very different. We live that, but I think like broader non-Muslims don't know this. Like we're not a monolith. Like we're an amazing, robust, diverse community that is much more God-centered than most people. That's just the reality. We're very God-centered.
Yeah. And I think you've spoken quite a bit about mental health within the community, or mental health challenges within the community, more than other imams that I've been listening to. What challenges are you hearing right now? Because I think this generation, they're more open. Back in the day, you would have to hide it, or they would put you in a box if you did say you had issues. How are you guiding and navigating those individuals that are coming to you?
When I was part of an institution, I work with Center DC now in DC, which I have found like 10 years ago. I started to realize in Boston, the first night I worked as an imam in Boston, I had a young man come into the office and tell me he had been raped at a YMCA, man. Young man. And coming from Azhar and thinking, hey, I'm hot stuff, man. I got my shoe contract. And then when he was talking to me, I was like, I'm so acutely ill-equipped to handle this situation. And he's like, why would God do this to me? How do you answer that question? And so I realized that night that this is an interdisciplinary position if it's going to be done right. So we partnered with Dr. Ben, with Dr. Sarah, and created sort of a intake at the masjid for people once a week. And then we started also like an AA in the masjid. We started for chemical issues. We were creating a GED program for before I left that was going to run in the city, not just for Muslim kids, but for kids in Roxbury and Dorchester that would get them their GEDs. And then we also started to partner with lawyers that could hopefully help juveniles that had like potential felonies, stuff related to paper, being on paper, problems, try to help them get through that. So I realized early on, man, there's no way you can do this on your own. And I don't know I probably need therapy. You know what I'm saying? Who the heck am I? I do have a problem with Western therapy in the sense that it is so orbited around the individual and that it always makes us blame people for how we feel. And I'm not saying that always, but I've seen it a lot, right? At a practical level. So I'm not trying to throw therapists under the bus. So I do believe we have to reinforce the idea of resiliency. And that's where religion can come in. Sumud, right? Sabr. But again, I just realized my own deficiencies. I don't know how to treat this. I don't know how to help this. I don't have answers for this. Chemical addiction issues, aggressive behavior, trauma. Those are things that we have people who are Muslim in our community that are geniuses, brilliant, talented, religiously committed, who would do a great job. So I just felt like we need to partner with them and bring them into the community to help us out.
But don't you think we would have been shut down 15, 20 years ago?
I faced opposition to both. So what we did in Boston is very important. We ran it like a campaign. And that is that we talked to all of the different ethnic religious leaders and said, hey, this is what we want to do. This is why. And then we did a town hall with the doctors. And they came, we had translators for people that couldn't speak English. And so that created buy-in. And then when people saw results, hey, man, this thing saved my marriage. Hey, this helped my uncle get off alcohol. Then there was even a greater buy-in. And at the same time, being critical of certain components of psychotherapy, the Freudian, although it's long gone, I'm just saying, people want to be critical. We wouldn't say, astaghfirullah. Say it, man. If you're critical of what? Okay, let's hear what that criticism is about, and then let's address that criticism. So it worked out well, man. I think younger generations, I'm seeing Gen Z, young millennials, they may even overly trust the different sort of component there. And then in the middle, you have life coaching, which I'm not a fan of. But I think there's a balance that needs to be there.
Yeah, I hear that. This is a tough one for you. How do we tackle the Sunni Shia divide?
First of all, we have to affirm that we're all Muslims. Like, we have to start from there. We take like the fatwa of Azhar, Sheikh Shaltut, Qaradawi, I think years ago, Allah yarhamhum, talked about this. Muhammad Ghazali went to Iran. So I think on a theological side, that's actually not hard, right? Generally, right? Muslims don't like declaring other people disbelievers. Contrary to what people may think, we actually are warned by the Prophet of doing this. There's numerous very serious texts. I think also we have to look at Sunni division. Sunnis are extremely divided in ways that are unacceptable, right? The bombs on Palestinian brothers and sisters and Lebanese brothers and sisters and Yemeni brothers and sisters, they don't care what group you follow, man. They could care less about who your imam is. And I think within the Sunni component, the idea of abstract unity is not an accomplishment. There has to be functional unity, and it's not there. And then we can start to think about, because sometimes we romanticize, we're going to get along with the Jews, we'll get along with the Christians, we'll get along with these non-Muslims. And then within the Muslim circle, we're going to get along with the Shia, but we are ourselves. So this is like hypocrisy, right? And then I think with Shias, there's the Shia brothers and sisters, there's a number of ways to do this. Number one is, I think theologically, it's easy. For me, someone not having necessarily a stake in that fight, man, the political part is the problem, man. Syria, Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, Saudi. And that's something that's beyond me, bro. Sometimes I don't get all of that. But I think maybe having a sit down in America amongst these leaders and say, listen, what are you going to do to help build power in America that is ultimately going to benefit the broader community? Can you? If you can't, then okay, fine. But like back home stuff, I get it. It's important. Like things happen. There's been violations. I get it. Okay. But at the end of the day, how do we move beyond now the angst that I talked about earlier? Legitimate angst. Is there an idea of pragmatic unity, pragmatic mandate that we can all work on? I think that second piece, I can't do that. I'm not from those cultures. I'm not from those communities. That's going to have to be navigated.
Do you think we'll get there?
I don't know, man. It's a very sensitive topic right now, understandably. But I think in the future of Islam in America, there has to be meta conversations and meta ideas that sort of supersede, doesn't ignore, doesn't dismiss. Yeah, we need to work. This needs to be talked about. This needs to be addressed. I get it. But at the end of the day, man, there's a broader thing. We've got to get done, right? And if we don't get it done, then we will have failed to be completely prophetic. I think that is where those discussions have to happen.
Yeah, I hear that. So talk about Swiss.
So Swiss is an online school. We're going to start a campus here in the DC area next fall. Alhamdulillah, we have a building $24 a month for everyone's whole family. It's basically like a madrasa in your pocket. And it has programming that covers a curriculum of around 5 or 6 core courses for people that are just like, they don't want to be scholars, they want to be functional. So our focus is functional. As you can hear in my words, I'm very much against like abstractions. I don't care about what Islam did in Andalus. What did Islam do in Anacostia? Right? What's Islam doing in Bethesda? Right? I've been to Andalus, I love it. Alhamdulillah, it's gone. What am I going to do in Oklahoma? So I think one of the things we look at is like a responsible, practical, functional religion that's rooted in knowledge. So we cover these core foundational courses on theology, on devotion, on faith. The public intellectual, or even activists, influencers, you're a mom going to a PTA meeting and you're asked to talk about Ramadan at your school, like that stuff is going to help you. At the same time, it'll give you exposure to scholarship if you want to go higher. So here in DC, we plan to like ordain imams to start that process. But we're a for-profit, not non-profit. And so all we ask is people $24 a month, man. You have 3,000 people paying $24 a month, you can build your school. Yeah. We've already done the numbers. So check it out. It's good. It's online. Visit our website. Appreciate the love, man. Thank you.
When is the campus actually going to open?
In the fall.
The fall. Okay.
We got a big subscription drive in Ramadan. So if we can get to 2,000 subscribers, then we can definitely move in and hire staff and get going.
Doing one thing for Ramadan, a Ramadan message.
It's been an incredible experience. And I want to wish everybody a blessed Ramadan. And we certainly talked about a lot of things, maybe not explicitly addressing Ramadan, but implicitly implied in what we should gain from the month of Ramadan as far as a commitment to justice and self-awareness.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, man. We should do this more often, bro.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.